The bustling streets of Seoul came to a standstill as police sirens wailed through the air. Curious onlookers gathered, their faces a mix of shock and intrigue, as they witnessed a scene straight out of a crime drama. In the center of it all stood Soo-yeon, a woman in her early 30s, her face contorted with anguish and disbelief. And if you want a handsome CEO in your life and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't do it. Soo-yeon's cries pierced the air as two stern-faced police officers firmly gripped her arms, leading her towards the waiting patrol car. Her sleek black hair, usually neatly tied back, now hung in disarray around her tear-stained face. She wore a crumpled white blouse and black pencil skirt, a stark contrast to her usual polished appearance. As the officers pushed her head down to guide her into the back seat, Soo-yeon's eyes darted frantically around the crowd. She searched desperately for a friendly face, someone who might believe in her innocence. Instead, her gaze locked onto a figure standing at the edge of the commotion, Jun-suk, her husband. Jun-suk stood there, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his posture relaxed and confident. As their eyes met, a small, satisfied smile played at the corners of his lips. It was a smile that spoke volumes, a silent declaration of victory that sent chills down Soo-yeon's spine. In that moment, she knew with horrifying certainty that her own husband had orchestrated her downfall. The car door slammed shut, muffling Soo-yeon's sobs as the police vehicle pulled away from the curb. The crowd began to disperse, their curiosity satiated for the moment, unaware of the intricate web of deceit that had just ensnared an innocent woman. Hours later, Soo-yeon found herself in a stark, cold cell. The harsh fluorescent lights cast an unflattering glow on the drab gray walls, emphasizing the bleakness of her new reality. She sat on the thin mattress of her bunk, her knees pulled up to her chest, still trying to process the events that had led her to this point. The sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Soo-yeon looked up to see a guard escorting another woman into the cell. The newcomer, introduced as Jisoo, was a petite woman with short, spiky hair and a hardened expression that spoke of years of struggle. "First time?" Jisoo asked, her voice gruff but not unkind. Soo-yeon nodded, unable to find her voice. "What are you in for?" Jisoo continued, settling onto the opposite bunk. "Theft," Soo-yeon whispered, her voice cracking. "But I didn't do it. My husband, he set me up." Jisoo's eyes softened slightly. Another one of those. You'd be surprised how many of us are here because of the men in our lives." As the night wore on, Soo-yeon found herself opening up to Jisoo and the other women in the communal areas. She listened to their stories, tales of betrayal, desperation, and injustice. There was Minji, arrested for drug possession after her boyfriend planted evidence in her apartment, and Eun-hee, serving time for fraud committed by her business partner. Their stories, while heartbreaking, ignited a spark of determination in Soo-yeon. She realized she wasn't alone in her fight for justice, and their resilience inspired her to stand strong in the face of adversity. "You can't let them win," Eun-hee told her one evening, her eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. "Fight back. Show them that they can't break you." Soo-yeon took these words to heart, vowing to herself that she would not let Jun-suk's betrayal define her. She would fight, not just for herself, but for all the women who had been wronged by a system that too often failed them. Meanwhile, in a luxurious office in the heart of Seoul's business district, Tae-hyung, CEO of a prominent tech company, sat at his desk, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through the day's news on his tablet. His eyes caught on a headline, "Prominent businessman's wife arrested in major theft case." Intrigued, Tae-hyung began to read, his interest growing with each sentence. The article detailed Soo-yeon's arrest, the evidence against her, and her vehement claims of innocence. Something about the story didn't sit right with him. The details seemed too neat, too convenient. Tae-hyung leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had built his career on intuition and a keen sense for detecting when something was amiss. Right now, every instinct he had was screaming that there was more to this story than met the eye. He pulled up more articles, diving deeper into the case. The more he read, the more convinced he became that Soo-yeon was telling the truth. The evidence against her seemed circumstantial at best, and the speed with which she had been arrested and charged was suspicious. As he stared at Soo-yeon's photo, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, now labeled a criminal, Tae-hyung felt an inexplicable urge to help her. It wasn't just about justice. There was something about her story that resonated with him on a personal level. Tae-hyung picked up his phone, his decision made. "Jung-hoon," he said as his assistant answered, "I need you to clear my schedule for the next few weeks. We have a new project." "Of course, sir," Jung-hoon replied, used to his boss's sudden bursts of inspiration. "May I ask what this is about?" Tae-hyung's eyes fixed on Soo-yeon's photo. "We're going to investigate a theft case. I believe an innocent woman has been wrongly imprisoned, and I intend to find out why." As he hung up the phone, Tae-hyung felt a surge of energy. He knew he was potentially stepping into a dangerous situation. If Soo-yeon was indeed innocent, it meant that someone powerful enough to manipulate evidence and influence the justice system was behind her imprisonment. But Tae-hyung had never been one to shy away from a challenge, especially when he believed he was fighting for what was right. He began to plan his next moves. He would need to visit Soo-yeon in prison, gather more information about the case, and start digging into the backgrounds of everyone involved, including Jun-suk. Tae-hyung was aware that his actions might draw unwanted attention, but he was prepared to face whatever consequences came his way. As night fell over Seoul, 3 individuals found themselves at pivotal moments in their lives. Soo-yeon, lying awake in her prison cell, clung to hope and the newfound strength she had discovered in herself and the stories of her fellow inmates. Jun-suk, in his luxurious penthouse, basked in the success of his scheme, unaware of the forces aligning against him. And Tae-hyung, working late into the night in his office, set in motion a series of events that would unravel a web of corruption and change all their lives forever. The stage was set for a battle of wits, determination, and justice. As dawn broke over the city, none of them could have predicted the twists and turns that lay ahead, nor the unlikely alliances that would form in the pursuit of truth. The harsh fluorescent lights of the prison visiting area buzzed overhead as Soo-yeon sat nervously at a metal table, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She had been surprised when the guard informed her of a visitor, certain that her so-called friends and family had abandoned her after her arrest. The door opened, and a tall, well-dressed man entered the room. "Hello, Soo-yeon. I'm Tae-hyung," he said, his voice calm and reassuring as he took a seat across from her. Soo-yeon's eyes widened with recognition. "You're the CEO of TechVision. What are you doing here?" Tae-hyung leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've been following your case, and something doesn't add up. I believe you're innocent, and I want to help prove it." Tears welled up in Soo-yeon's eyes, a mix of disbelief and hope flooding through her. "But why? You don't even know me." "Because justice matters," Tae-hyung replied simply. "And I have a feeling there's more to this story than what's being reported. Will you tell me everything?" For the next hour, Soo-yeon poured out her story, her seemingly perfect life with Jun-suk, the shocking arrest, and her suspicions about her husband's involvement. Tae-hyung listened intently, asking pointed questions and taking mental notes. As their time drew to a close, Tae-hyung reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of Soo-yeon's. "I promise you, I will find the truth and bring it to light. Stay strong, Soo-yeon. This isn't over." Soo-yeon nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. For the first time since her arrest, she felt a glimmer of hope. After leaving the prison, Tae-hyung threw himself into the investigation. He hired a team of private investigators, pored over financial records, and delved deep into Jun-suk's background. Days turned into weeks as he pieced together a complex puzzle of deceit and corruption. One evening, as Tae-hyung sat in his office surrounded by stacks of documents, his assistant Jung-hoon burst in, his face pale. "Sir, I think you need to see this," Jung-hoon said, handing over a file. Tae-hyung's eyes widened as he scanned the contents. The documents revealed a series of suspicious transactions between Jun-suk's company and offshore accounts linked to prominent political figures. It was the first concrete evidence of a larger scheme. "This is bigger than we thought," Taehyung murmured. "It's not just about framing Soo-yeon. There's a whole network of money laundering happening right under our noses." Jung-hoon shifted nervously. "Sir, this involves some very powerful people. Are you sure you want to continue?" Taehyung's jaw set in determination. "More than ever. Soo-yeon is just a scapegoat in a much larger game. We need to expose all of it." Over the next few days, Taehyung and his team worked tirelessly, following the money trail and connecting the dots. They uncovered links between Jun-suk's company and several high-ranking politicians, all pointing to a sophisticated money laundering operation. As Taehyung delved deeper into the company records, he stumbled upon a name that made his blood run cold: Congressman Park Sung-min, one of the most influential politicians in the country. There were multiple meetings scheduled between Jun-suk and Park, always off the books and in private locations. Taehyung leaned back in his chair, the implications of his discovery sinking in. This wasn't just about a husband framing his wife anymore. They were dealing with a corruption scandal that could shake the very foundations of the country's political and business elite. He picked up his phone, dialing a number he had memorized. "Soo-yeon, it's Taehyung. I need to see you tomorrow. I've found something, and it's big." The next day, Taehyung sat across from Soo-yeon in the prison visiting room, his voice low as he explained his findings. Soo-yeon's face paled as she realized the extent of her husband's involvement. "I had no idea," she whispered, her hands shaking. "I knew Jun-suk was ambitious, but this... how could I have been so blind?" Taehyung reached out, this time allowing his hand to rest on hers. "You couldn't have known. Men like Jun-suk are expert manipulators. But now we have a chance to bring it all down." Soo-yeon looked up, a fierce determination in her eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "For now, stay safe," Taehyung replied. "I'm going to keep digging. We need irrefutable evidence before we can move against them. These people are powerful, and they won't go down without a fight." As Taehyung left the prison, his mind was already racing with next steps. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but the stakes were too high to back down now. He had promised Soo-yeon he would uncover the truth, and he intended to keep that promise. No matter the cost. Back at his office, Taehyung called a meeting with his most trusted team members. "From this moment on, we operate with the utmost secrecy," he instructed. "What we're dealing with here could have serious repercussions. If anyone wants to back out, now's the time." The room remained silent, each member nodding their commitment. Taehyung felt a surge of pride in his team. "All right, let's get to work. We need to find concrete evidence linking Jun-suk, Congressman Park, and anyone else involved in this scheme." As the team dispersed, Taehyung remained in the conference room, staring out the window at the Seoul skyline. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something much bigger than they had initially imagined. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but he was determined to see it through. Little did Taehyung know that his actions had not gone unnoticed. In a dimly lit office across town, Jun-suk received a phone call. "Sir, we have a problem," the voice on the other end said. "Someone's been digging into the accounts. A CEO named Taehyung." Jun-suk's grip tightened on the phone. "Find out everything you can about him," he growled. "No one threatens what we've built. No one." As night fell over Seoul, the pieces of a complex chess game were being moved into place. Taehyung, driven by a sense of justice and in growing attachment to Soo-yeon, was stepping into a world of danger he couldn't fully comprehend. Soo-yeon, behind bars but with renewed hope, steeled herself for the fight ahead. And Jun-suk, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble, prepared to do whatever it took to protect his interests. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the corridors of power and test the limits of loyalty, love, and justice. The bustling streets of Seoul seemed oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface of its gleaming skyscrapers and neon-lit alleys. As Taehyung's investigation deepened, a new player entered the scene, one who would add yet another layer of complexity to the already intricate web of deceit. Min-seo, Soo-yeon's younger sister, arrived in the city with a determined glint in her eye. She had been abroad when news of Soo-yeon's arrest broke, and it had taken her weeks to wrap up her affairs and return to Korea. Now, she was ready to fight for her sister's freedom. Her first stop was Taehyung's office. She marched past the receptionist, ignoring protests, and barged into his office unannounced. "I'm Minaseo, Seon's sister," she declared, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "And I want to know what you're doing to help her." Taehyung, caught off guard by the sudden intrusion, quickly regained his composure. "Ms. Minaseo, I understand your concern. Please have a seat. I'll explain everything we've been doing." Over the next hour, Taehyung brought Minaseo up to speed on the investigation, careful to omit certain sensitive details. As he spoke, he couldn't help but notice the resemblance between the sisters, the same determined set of the jaw, the same fire in their eyes. "I want to help," Minaseo said as Taehyung finished his explanation. "I know my sister, and I know Junsuk. There's more to this story, and I think I can help uncover it."
Taehin hesitated.
Bringing in another person could complicate things, potentially jeopardize the entire investigation. But something in Minaseo's resolute expression made him reconsider. "All right," he agreed cautiously. "But you need to understand the risks. This goes beyond just your sister's case. We're dealing with powerful people who won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens them." Minaseo's eyes hardened. "Junsuk already threatened me when I tried to speak up for Suyeon. I'm not afraid of him or his cronies." With that, Minaseo became an integral part of the investigation team. Her insider knowledge of Junsuk and his circle proved invaluable, providing context to financial transactions and relationships that had previously been unclear. As days turned into weeks, Taehyung found himself working closely with Minaseo. They spent long hours poring over documents, connecting dots, and strategizing their next moves. In the process, an undeniable tension began to build between them. It started with small things: lingering glances, hands brushing as they reached for the same file, the electricity in the air when they worked late into the night. Taehyung tried to ignore it, reminding himself of the gravity of their mission and his commitment to helping Suyeon. But he couldn't deny the growing attraction he felt towards Minaseo. For her part, Minaseo seemed equally affected. She found herself admiring Taehyung's dedication, his sharp mind, and his unwavering determination to uncover the truth. But beneath her professional exterior, she harbored a secret, one that could potentially derail everything they had worked for. One evening, as they were wrapping up another marathon session of investigation, Minaseo's phone buzzed with a message. Her face paled as she read it, and she quickly excused herself, leaving a confused Taehyung behind. In the privacy of the bathroom, Minaseo reread the message, her hands shaking. "I know you're back in town, darling. Don't forget our little arrangement. Keep your mouth shut, or your sister won't be the only one behind bars." Minaseo gripped the sink, her mind racing. She had hoped her past with Junsuk would remain buried, but it seemed the ghosts of her mistakes were coming back to haunt her. When she returned to Taehyung's office, he immediately sensed something was wrong. "Minaseo? Are you all right?" She forced a smile. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Taehyung nodded, not entirely convinced. "Why don't we call it a night? We've made good progress today." As they gathered their things to leave, the tension between them reached a boiling point. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Taehyung took a step closer, his hand reaching out to touch Minaseo's arm. "Minaseo, But before he could finish, Minaseo pulled away. "I can't," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "There's something you need to know." Taehyung's heart raced, both from the near miss of their almost kiss and from the ominous tone in Minaseo's voice. "What is it?" Minaseo took a deep breath, steeling herself for the revelation she was about to make. "It's about Junsuk. He and we have a history." Taehyung's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, a history?" "Before he married Suyeon," Minaseo continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "Junsuk and I were lovers." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Taehyung took a step back, his mind reeling from the implications of this revelation. Does Soohyun know? He asked, his voice strained. Min-seo shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, and that's not all. Jun-suk, he's been blackmailing me, threatening to reveal our past if I tried to help Soohyun. Taehyung ran a hand through his hair, trying to process this new information. The case had just become infinitely more complicated. Not only did they have to contend with a large-scale corruption scheme, but now there was this personal entanglement to consider as well. Why are you telling me this now? Taehyung asked, his tone a mix of confusion and accusation. Min-seo looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and determination. Because I can't keep lying. And because I think this might be the key to bringing Jun-suk down. I have information, Taehyung. Information that could blow this whole case wide open. As the weight of Min-seo's words settled over them, the atmosphere in the office changed. The tension between them was still there, but it had transformed into something else, a shared understanding of the complicated path that lay ahead. Taehyung knew that this revelation could either be their downfall or their salvation. The personal drama threatened to overshadow their investigation, but it also provided a new angle, a potential weakness in Jun-suk's armor. As they stood there, the city lights twinkling outside the window, Taehyung made a decision. Tell me everything, he said, his voice firm. Every detail, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. If we're going to win this, we need the whole truth. Min-seo nodded, relief washing over her features. As she began to speak, unraveling the tangled history between herself, Jun-suk, and Soohyun, Taehyung listened intently. He knew that the information she was about to share could change everything, for better or for worse. The night stretched on as Min-seo's story unfolded, adding new layers to their already complex investigation. As dawn broke over Seoul, Taehyung and Min-seo found themselves at a crossroads, armed with new information but facing even greater challenges. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. But with the truth finally coming to light, they were one step closer to unraveling the conspiracy and freeing Soohyun. The question remained, at what cost would justice be served? The morning sun cast long shadows across Taehyung's office as he paced back and forth, his mind racing with the implications of Min-seo's revelation. The weight of her confession hung heavy in the air, complicating an already intricate case. We need to talk about this, Taehyung said, finally breaking the tense silence that had settled between them. Your past with Jun-suk, it changes things. Min-seo sat rigidly in her chair, her eyes following Taehyung's movement. I know, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But I swear to you, my only intention now is to help my sister. Taehyung stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression a mix of concern and skepticism. How can I be sure? How do I know this isn't some elaborate plan concocted by Jun-suk to derail our investigation? Min-seo's eyes flashed with hurt and indignation. She stood up, squaring her shoulders. Because I love my sister more than anything in this world. Yes, I made mistakes in the past, but I'm here now, risking everything to make it right. For a long moment, Taehyung studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Finally, he nodded, his posture relaxing slightly. All right, I believe you. But from now on, no more secrets. We need to trust each other completely if we're going to see this through. Min-seo nodded, relief washing over her features. Thank you, Taehyung. I promise, you can trust me. With the air cleared between them, they turned their focus back to the investigation. Taehyung pulled out a whiteboard, and together they began mapping out everything they knew, incorporating Min-seo's new information. We need to create a timeline, Taehyung mused, scribbling furiously. Your relationship with Jun-suk, when it ended, when he started seeing Soohyun, every detail could be crucial. As they worked, a new idea began to form. What if, Taehyung said slowly, we used public pressure to our advantage? If we can get enough people rallying behind Soohyun's innocence, it might force the authorities to take a closer look at the case. Min-seo's eyes lit up. A public campaign, that could work. But how do we do it without tipping off Jun-suk and his accomplices? Taehyung smiled, a plan already forming in his mind. We organize a charity event. On the surface, it'll be about raising awareness for wrongful convictions. But underneath, it'll be our platform to start building support for Soo-yeon. Energized by the new direction, they threw themselves into planning the event. Taehyung leveraged his business connections to secure a venue and sponsors, while Min Se-oh reached out to activist groups and legal experts who could lend credibility to their cause. As the days passed, their work brought them closer together. The initial tension between them had evolved into a deep mutual respect and understanding. They found themselves working late into the night, sharing takeout meals and personal stories as they strategized. One evening, as they were finalizing the guest list for the event, Min Se-oh's phone buzzed with a message. Her face paled as she read it. "What is it?" Taehyung asked, immediately alert. Min Se-oh handed in the phone, her hand shaking slightly. The message was short but chilling. "I know what you're planning. Back off now, or face the consequences." Taehyung's jaw clenched as he read the threat. He's getting nervous. We must be on the right track. Min Se-oh nodded, but Taehyung could see the fear in her eyes. He reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're in this together, Min Se-oh. I won't let anything happen to you or Soo-yeon." She looked up at him, a mix of gratitude and something deeper shining in her eyes. For a moment, they stayed like that, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Taehyung cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "We should increase security for the event. And maybe it's time we brought in some outside help." Over the next few days, they doubled down on their efforts, working tirelessly to ensure every detail of the charity event was perfect. They hired additional security personnel and reached out to trusted journalists who could help spread their message. As the day of the event approached, the tension and excitement were palpable. Taehyung and Min Se-oh knew they were walking a tightrope. One misstep could send everything crashing down. The morning of the event, Taehyung arrived at the venue early to oversee the final preparations. As he walked through the entrance, a young man bumped into him, mumbling a quick apology before hurrying away. It wasn't until he reached the main hall that Taehyung noticed the envelope that had been slipped into his pocket. With trembling hands, he opened it, his heart racing as he read the contents. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "We know everything. Cancel the event, or the truth about Min Se-oh's past will be made public. You have until noon to comply." Taehyung's mind reeled. They were so close to making a breakthrough, but this threat could unravel everything. He knew he had to make a decision, and fast. As he stood there, the weight of the situation bearing down on him, Min Se-oh entered the hall. She immediately sensed something was wrong. What happened? He looked at her, conflict clear in his eyes. Should he show her the note? Could they risk going ahead with the event? Or was it time to retreat and regroup? The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, counting down the minutes until noon. Taehyung took a deep breath, knowing that his next move would determine not just the fate of their investigation, but potentially the lives of everyone involved. "Min Se-oh," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk. There's been a new development." As he began to explain the situation, the bustling sounds of event preparation faded into the background. The next few hours would be crucial, testing their resolve, their trust in each other, and their commitment to justice. The charity event, once a beacon of hope, now stood on a knife's edge. As Taehyung and Min Se-oh huddled together, discussing their options in hushed tones, the true battle was just beginning. The countdown to noon had started, and with it, the race to outmaneuver their unseen adversaries before it was too late. The tension in the room was palpable as Taehyung finished explaining the threat to Min Se-oh. Her face had drained of color, but her eyes remained determined. "We can't give in to their threats," Min Se-oh said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "If we act down now, we'll lose all the momentum we've built." Taehyung nodded, a mixture of pride and concern washing over him. "I agree, but we need to be smart about this. We have less than 3 hours to come up with a plan." They quickly gathered their core team, briefing them on the situation while maintaining a facade of calm for the event staff bustling around them. As they brainstormed strategies, Taehyung's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "Mr. Taehyung." A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "I hope you've considered our offer carefully. It would be a shame if Ms. Min Seo's colorful past were to become public knowledge." Taehyung's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this? What do you want?" "Who I am is irrelevant," the voice replied. "As for what I want, it's simple. Cancel the event, and all copies of the incriminating evidence against Min Seo will be destroyed. Refuse, and not only will her past be exposed, but will ensure that your reputation and company go down with her." The line went dead, leaving Taehyung staring at his phone in disbelief. He quickly relayed the conversation to the team, watching as their faces grew more concerned. Min Seo stood up abruptly. "I can't let you all risk everything for me. Maybe I should just come clean. Tell the truth about my past before they can use it against us." Taehyung shook his head. "No, that's exactly what they want. If you come forward now, it'll discredit our entire campaign. We need to find another way." As the team debated their options, Taehyung's mind raced. There had to be a way to turn this situation to their advantage. Suddenly, an idea struck him. "What if," he began slowly, "we use their threat against them? We don't cancel the event, but we change its focus. Instead of just talking about Soo-yeon's case, we expose the entire corruption network. We make it clear that we have evidence implicating high-level officials and businessmen. If they release information about Min Seo, we release everything we have on them." The room fell silent as everyone considered the audacity of the plan. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it might be their only option. "But we don't have all the evidence yet," one team member pointed out. Taehyung's eyes gleamed with determination. "They don't know that. We bluff. Make them think we know more than we do. It's a gamble, but it might be enough to make them back off." Min Seo reached out and squeezed Taehyung's hand. "I'm with you. Whatever happens, we face it together." With renewed purpose, the team sprang into action. They had less than 2 hours to rewrite speeches, update presentation materials, and brief key allies on the new strategy. As the event start time drew near, guests began to arrive. Taehyung stood at the entrance, greeting people with a calm smile that belied his inner turmoil. His eyes constantly scanned the crowd, looking for any sign of trouble. Just as he was about to head backstage for final preparations, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Jun-suk, looking impeccably dressed and infuriatingly smug, was making his way through the lobby. Taehyung's blood ran cold. He quickly signaled to his security team, then made his way towards Jun-suk. "Mr. Jun-suk," Taehyung said, his voice low and controlled. "I wasn't aware you were on the guest list." Jun-suk smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world. It's not every day one gets to witness such a spirited defense of a lost cause." Before Taehyung could respond, Min Seo appeared at his side. Her face was a mask of composure, but Taehyung could feel the tension radiating from her. "Jun-suk," she said coolly. "It's been a long time." Jun-suk's smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Min Seo, I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd learn to stay out of matters that don't concern you." "My sister's freedom concerns me very much," Min Seo replied, her voice steady. "And so does exposing the truth about the people who wronged her." Jun-suk's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Min Seo. You're playing a dangerous game." "No," Taehyung interjected, stepping slightly in front of Min Seo. "You're the one who should be careful. We know more than you think, Jun-suk. And after tonight, so will everyone else." For a moment, the three of them stood in tense silence, the bustling crowd around them fading into the background. Then, with a final smirk, Jun-suk turned and disappeared into the throng of guests. Taehyung let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Are you okay?" he asked Min Seo. She nodded, her composure cracking slightly. "I will be. Let's just get through this night." As they made their way backstage, Taehyung's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "You're making a mistake." last chance to back down. Taehyung showed the message to Min Seo. She read it, then looked up at him, determination blazing in her eyes. "We're doing this," she said firmly. Taehyung nodded, feeling a surge of admiration for her courage. He took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Together," he said. As the lights dimmed and the announcer called Taehyung to the stage, he took a deep breath. The next few hours would determine everything. He stepped out onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong and clear. "Thank you for coming tonight. We're here to talk about justice, about truth, and about the corruption that threatens the very foundations of our society." In the audience, Jun-suk shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Taehyung locked eyes with him as he continued. "What you're about to hear tonight will shock you. It will anger you. But most importantly, it will open your eyes to the truth that's been hidden for far too long." As Taehyung launched into his speech, laying out the evidence of corruption and manipulation, he could feel the energy in the room shifting. The audience leaned forward in their seats, hanging on his every word. In that moment, as he stood under the glaring lights, Taehyung knew that regardless of the outcome, they had already won a significant victory. The truth was finally being spoken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The charity event was in full swing, the grand ballroom buzzing with energy as Taehyung's words reverberated through the crowd. Journalists scribbled furiously in their notepads, while politicians and business leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Taehyung continued, his voice steady and resolute, "the case of Soo-yeon is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a much larger problem, a systemic corruption that has infected the highest levels of our business and political world." He paused, his eyes scanning the audience. In the back of the room, he spotted Jun-suk, his face a mask of barely contained anger. "We have evidence," Taehyung pressed on, "of a vast money laundering operation involving some of the most prominent names in our country. This operation not only defrauds honest citizens, but also undermines the very foundations of our democracy." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Taehyung could see phones being pulled out, no doubt live-tweeting his revelations. "And at the center of this web of deceit," he said, his voice rising, "is a man who has manipulated the system, framed an innocent woman, and betrayed the trust of countless others. That man is Jun-suk." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. All eyes turned to Jun-suk, who had risen from his seat, his face contorted with rage. "This is slander," Jun-suk shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at Taehyung. "You have no proof of these ridiculous allegations." Taehyung remained calm, a slight smile playing on his lips. "On the contrary, Mr. Jun-suk, we have extensive documentation, witness testimonies, and financial records that prove every word I've said. And as we speak, this evidence is being delivered to the prosecutor's office and select members of the press." The room descended into chaos. Reporters rushed to file their stories, while several attendees made hasty exits, no doubt fearing their own names might be implicated. In the midst of the commotion, Min Seo took the stage, joining Taehyung. Her presence caused another stir in the audience. "My name is Min Seo," she began, her voice trembling slightly, but gaining strength with each word. "I am Soo-yeon's sister, and I am here to tell you that everything Mr. Taehyung has said is true. I have witnessed firsthand the corruption and manipulation that Jun-suk is capable of." As Min Seo spoke, recounting her experiences and the evidence they had gathered, Taehyung watched the crowd. He could see the tide turning, skepticism giving way to outrage as the full extent of the corruption was laid bare. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the back of the room. Jun-suk, realizing the gravity of the situation, was attempting to leave. But Taehyung had anticipated this. With a subtle nod to his security team, Jun-suk found his exit blocked. As Min Seo concluded her speech, the room erupted in applause. Taehyung stepped forward, addressing the crowd once more. "We are at a crossroads," he said. "We can choose to ignore these revelations, to continue with business as usual. Or we can choose to take a stand, to demand accountability, and to fight for justice, not just for Soo-yeon, but for all those who have been victimized by this corrupt system. The response was overwhelming. People stood, applauding and cheering. Taehyung could see determination in their eyes, a collective resolve to see this through. As the event wound down, Taehyung and Min Se-yo were swarmed by reporters and well-wishers. The air was electric with the sense that something momentous had just occurred. In the midst of the chaos, Taehyung felt a hand on his arm. He turned to find Min Se-yo looking at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "We did it," she said softly. Taehyung nodded, allowing himself a moment of triumph. "We've taken the first step," he replied. "But the real fight is just beginning." As if to underscore his words, Taehyung's phone buzzed with a message. It was from his contact in the prosecutor's office. Evidence received. Investigation officially reopened. A surge of hope coursed through Taehyung. They had struck a blow against corruption, and for the first time in months, justice for Soo-yeon seemed within reach. But as he looked across the room, he caught sight of Jun-suk being escorted out by security. The man's eyes met Taehyung's, and the look in them sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the night wore on, and the event finally came to a close, Taehyung and Min Se-yo found themselves alone in the now empty ballroom. The weight of what they had accomplished, and the challenges that still lay ahead, hung heavy in the air between them. "What now?" Min Se-yo asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Taehyung took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Now, we prepare for the backlash. Jun-suk and his allies won't go down without a fight. We need to be ready for anything." As they stood there, the first light of dawn beginning to filter through the windows, both Taehyung and Min Se-yo knew that their lives had irrevocably changed. They had taken a stand against corruption, exposed the truth, and set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of their society. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But as they looked at each other, a silent, understanding paw said between them, whatever came next, they would face it together. The battle for justice had only just begun. The aftermath of the charity event was immediate and far-reaching. News outlets across Korea were ablaze with headlines about the corruption scandal, and Soo-yeon's case was thrust back into the spotlight. Public opinion was shifting rapidly, with many calling for a full investigation and Soo-yeon's immediate release. In her prison cell, Soo-yeon sat glued to the small television, watching the coverage of the event unfold. Her heart swelled with hope and gratitude as she saw Taehyung and Min Se-yo bravely standing up for her, exposing the truth she had been trying to tell for so long. "I can't believe it," she whispered to her cellmate, tears streaming down her face. They did it. They really did it. Meanwhile, Taehyung and Min Se-yo were working tirelessly to keep the momentum going. They gave interviews, met with legal experts, and continued to gather and organize evidence. The pressure was mounting on the authorities to act, but they knew that Jun-suk and his allies wouldn't go down without a fight. One evening, as Taehyung was preparing for a crucial meeting with the prosecutor's office, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "You've made a grave mistake, Mr. Taehyung." Jun-suk's voice came through, cold and threatening. "Did you really think you could take me down so easily?" Taehyung's grip tightened on the phone. "It's over, Jun-suk. The truth is out there now. You can't hide anymore." Jun-suk chuckled mirthlessly. "Oh, you naive fool. You have no idea what you're up against. I have friends in high places, resources you can't even imagine. By the time I'm done with you, your reputation will be in tatters, your company will be bankrupt, and you'll be lucky if you're not joining your precious Soo-yeon behind bars." Before Taehyung could respond, the line went dead. He stood there for a moment, shaken by the encounter. Then, steeling himself, he dialed Min Se-yo's number. "Min Se-yo," he said when she answered. "We need to talk. Jun-suk just called. He's planning something big." They met at a small, out-of-the-way cafe, choosing a corner table where they could speak privately. Taehyung recounted his conversation with Jun-suk, watching as Min Seo's face grew more concerned with each word. "We knew this was coming," Min Seo said, her voice low and determined. "He's desperate now, which makes him even more dangerous. We need to be prepared for anything." Taehyung nodded, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Whatever happens, we're in this together. We can't back down now, not when we're so close." As they sat there, formulating plans and contingencies, neither of them noticed the man at the next table, his face hidden behind a newspaper, listening intently to every word. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Jun-suk launched a vicious counterattack. Suddenly, the media was flooded with stories questioning Taehyung's business practices, hinting at financial irregularities in his company. Anonymous sources came forward, claiming that Taehyung had a history of manipulating evidence and framing innocent people. The pressure was immense. Taehyung's board of directors was calling for his resignation, and he could feel the support he had garnered starting to waver. But he refused to give up. In the midst of the chaos, Min Seo received a call from the prison. Soo-yeon had managed to get access to a phone and needed to speak with them urgently. "Min Seo, listen carefully." Soo-yeon's voice was hushed and hurried. "There's a new prisoner here, a woman named Jiun. She says she used to work for Jun-suk's company in the accounting department. She knows things, Min Seo, important things that could help our case." Min Seo's heart raced as she relayed the information to Taehyung. This could be the break they needed, the final piece of evidence to bring Jun-suk down once and for all. But as they began to formulate a plan to get in touch with Jiun, they realized the enormity of the task ahead. How could they contact her without alerting Jun-suk? How could they ensure her safety and the integrity of her information? As night fell over Seoul, Taehyung stood at the window of his office, looking out at the city lights. The weight of their fight pressed heavily on his shoulders. He thought of Soo-yeon, still imprisoned for a crime she didn't commit. He thought of Min Seo, who had risked everything to help her sister. And he thought of the countless others who had been victimized by Jun-suk's corruption. His phone buzzed with a text from Min Seo. "No matter what happens, we don't give up. We're close, Taehyung. I can feel it." A small smile played on his lips as he read the message. She was right. They had come too far to back down now. Whatever Jun-suk threw at them, they would face it head-on. As he turned back to his desk, determined to work through the night if necessary, Taehyung felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was treacherous, but with Min Seo by his side and the truth on their side, he believed they could overcome anything. The final battle was approaching, and they would be ready. The following morning, Seoul awakened to a media frenzy. Jun-suk had called an emergency press conference, and the city was buzzing with speculation about what he might reveal. Taehyung and Min Seo watched from Taehyung's office as Jun-suk took the podium, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "My fellow citizens," Jun-suk began, his voice steady and authoritative, "I stand before you today to address the baseless accusations that have been leveled against me. These claims of corruption and fraud are nothing more than a desperate attempt by my competitors to tarnish my reputation and undermine the success of our company." As Jun-suk continued his speech, systematically refuting each of Taehyung's allegations with carefully crafted explanations, Min Seo's phone buzzed with an incoming call. "It's Soo-yeon," she whispered to Taehyung, stepping out of the room to answer. Taehyung's attention remained fixed on the television, his jaw clenching as he watched Jun-suk's performance. The man was good, he had to admit. His explanations were plausible, his demeanor confident and reassuring. Taehyung could see the tide of public opinion beginning to shift. Min Seo burst back into the room, her face pale. "Taehyung, we have a problem. Jiun, the new prisoner who had information for us, she's gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" Taehyung asked, tearing his eyes away from the screen. "Soo-yeon says she was transferred to another facility in the middle of the night. No explanation, no warning. It has to be Jun-suk's doing." Taehyung ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. They had been counting on Jiun's testimony to corroborate their evidence. Without her, their case suddenly felt much weaker. As they grappled with this new setback, Jun-suk delivered his final blow on screen. "And now," he said, his voice taking on a somber tone, "I must address a personal matter. It pains me to do this, but in the interest of full transparency, I feel I must share some information about Minaseo, the sister of my wife, Soo-yeon." Minaseo froze, her eyes widening in horror. "Minaseo and I had a relationship many years ago, before I met and fell in love with Soo-yeon," Jun-suk continued. "I'm not proud of this, but I bring it up now because I believe it's the root of Minaseo's vendetta against me. Her accusations are born not out of a pursuit of justice, but out of jealousy and a desire for revenge." The room fell silent as Jun-suk's words hung in the air. Tae-hyung turned to Minaseo, who had sunk into a chair, her face in her hands. "Minaseo," he said softly, kneeling beside.
"Deher."
"We knew this might happen. We prepared for this, remember?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and determination. "You're right," she said, taking a deep breath. "He thinks he can discredit me with this, but he's underestimated us." As Jun-suk concluded his press conference, Minaseo stood up, her resolve hardening. "It's time," she said to Tae-hyung. "I need to tell my side of the story." Within the hour, Minaseo was seated across from one of Korea's most respected journalists, cameras rolling as she prepared to give her own press statement. "Yes, it's true that Jun-suk and I had a relationship," Minaseo began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "But what he didn't tell you is that our relationship ended because I discovered evidence of his illegal activities. When I confronted him, he threatened me, forcing me to leave the country." As Minaseo continued, revealing details of Jun-suk's past misdeeds and the evidence she had gathered over the years, Tae-hyung watched from behind the cameras, a mix of admiration and concern on his face. The interview was raw, honest, and compelling. Minaseo laid bare not just Jun-suk's crimes, but her own struggles with guilt and fear. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, Tae-hyung was by Minaseo's side. "You did it," he said softly, squeezing her hand. "You were incredible." Minaseo managed a small smile, the emotional toll of the interview evident on her face. "Do you think it was enough?" she asked. Before Tae-hyung could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was his contact at the prosecutor's office. "Mr. Tae-hyung," the voice on the other end said urgently, "we've just received some new information. A whistleblower has come forward with documents corroborating your allegations against Jun-suk. We're reopening the investigation into Soo-yeon's case immediately." As Tae-hyung relayed the news to Minaseo, a wave of relief washed over them both. The tide was turning once again, but their moment of triumph was short-lived. As they left the television studio, Tae-hyung's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? This is far from over. Meet me at the old warehouse on the outskirts of town. Come alone, or Soo-yeon pays the price." Tae-hyung showed the message to Minaseo, his face grim. They both knew that this was it, the final confrontation they had been both anticipating and dreading. "We should call the police," Minaseo said, her voice trembling slightly. Tae-hyung shook his head. "We can't risk Soo-yeon's safety. I have to go." As they stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on them, Tae-hyung pulled Minaseo into a tight embrace. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "know that we did the right thing. We fought for the truth." Minaseo clung to him, tears threatening to spill. "Be careful," she said as they parted. "Come back to me." With a final nod, Tae-hyung turned and walked away, heading towards what he knew could be the most dangerous encounter of his life. The sun was setting over Seoul, casting long shadows as he made his way to the meeting point, ready to face Jun-suk one last time. The old warehouse loomed before Tae-hyung, its dilapidated structure a stark contrast to the sleek Seoul skyline in the distance. His heart pounded as he approached the entrance, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But the thought of Soo-yeon, still imprisoned and potentially in danger, steeled his resolve. As he stepped inside, the musty air filled his lungs. "Jun-suk," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space.
I am impressed, Taehyung.
You actually came alone. Jun-suk's voice rang out from the shadows. He emerged, looking disheveled but still maintaining an air of arrogance. Where's Soo-yeon? What have you done with her?
Taehyung demande.
Jun-suk laughed, a hollow sound that sent chills down Taehyung's spine. Relax. Your precious Soo-yeon is still safely behind bars. For now. Then why am I here, Jun-suk? What's your endgame? Jun-suk's eyes narrowed. My endgame? You've destroyed everything I've built. My reputation, my business, my life. I brought you here to offer you a choice. He pulled out a USB drive from his pocket. This contains evidence that will exonerate Soo-yeon completely. Bank records, emails, everything that proves her innocence and my guilt. It's yours on one condition. Taehyung's heart raced. This was everything they had been fighting for. What's the condition? He asked, wary of the catch. You leave the country. Tonight. Cut all ties with Soo-yeon, with Min Se-yo, with this whole mess. Disappear and never come back. The offer hung in the air between them. Taehyung's mind reeled. With that evidence, they could free Soo-yeon immediately. But the cost, and if I refuse? Taehyung asked, already knowing the answer. Jun-suk's face hardened. Then I destroy the evidence, and Soo-yeon rots in prison. Your choice, Taehyung. Your happiness or her freedom. As Taehyung grappled with the impossible decision, a commotion outside caught their attention. Suddenly, the warehouse doors burst open, and Min Se-yo rushed in, followed by a team of police officers. Min Se-yo cried out, relief evident in her voice. Jun-suk's eyes widened in panic. He turned to run, but found himself surrounded by officers. Jun-suk, you're under arrest, one of the officers announced, moving to handcuff him. In a desperate move, Jun-suk lunged towards Taehyung, the USB drive still clutched in his hand. But Taehyung was quicker. He grabbed Jun-suk's wrist, twisting it until the drive fell to the ground. As Jun-suk was led away, shouting threats and promises of retribution, Taehyung picked up the USB drive, holding it like it was the most precious thing in the world. Min Se-yo rushed to his side, her eyes full of concern. Are you okay? I couldn't let you face him alone. I called the police as soon as you left. Taehyung nodded, still processing what had just happened. You did the right thing, Min Se-yo. This, he held up the drive, this is what we need to free Soo-yeon. The next few hours passed in a blur. The evidence on the drive was verified, and an emergency hearing was called. Taehyung and Min Se-yo waited anxiously outside the courtroom as the judge reviewed the new information. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doors opened. Soo-yeon emerged, tears streaming down her face, but with a smile that could light up the darkest night. It's over, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm free. The three of them embraced, years of pain and struggle culminating in this moment of triumph. As they left the courthouse, a crowd of supporters and media had gathered, cheering Soo-yeon's release. In the days that followed, the full extent of Jun-suk's crimes came to light. More whistleblowers came forward, and the corruption network he had built began to crumble. Taehyung's reputation was restored, his actions now seen as heroic rather than questionable. One evening, as Taehyung, Min Se-yo, and Soo-yeon sat together in Taehyung's apartment, the weight of their ordeal finally began to lift. What happens now? Soo-yeon asked, still adjusting to her newfound freedom. Taehyung and Min Se-yo exchanged a look, years of unspoken feelings passing between them. Now, Taehyung said, taking Min Se-yo's hand, we start living again. All of us. As the Seoul skyline twinkled outside the window, the three of them raised their glasses in a toast. To justice, to freedom, and to the unbreakable bonds that had seen them through their darkest hours. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was also full of hope. They had faced corruption and won, proving that even in the darkest times, the truth could still prevail. In the weeks following Soo-yeon's release and Jun-suk's arrest, Seoul buzzed with the aftermath of the scandal. The media frenzy had barely died down, and the ripple effects of the corruption exposure were still being felt across the business and political landscape. Taehyung found himself thrust into the spotlight as a crusader for justice. Job offers and interview requests flooded in, but he remained focused on rebuilding his company and supporting Soo-yeon's reintegration into society. Min Se-yo, meanwhile, had become an unexpected icon for whistleblowers and anti-corruption advocates. Her bravery in coming forward with her story had inspired others to speak out against corporate malpractice. Soo-yeon, finally free after years of wrongful imprisonment, struggled to adjust to her new reality. The world had changed dramatically during her incarceration, and she often felt overwhelmed by the simplest tasks. One sunny afternoon, the three of them met at a quiet cafe, away from the prying eyes of the media. "I've been thinking," Soo-yeon said, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. "I want to use my experience to help others who have been wrongfully convicted."
Taehyung nodded encouragingly.
"That's a wonderful idea. Your perspective could make a real difference." "I could help," Min Se-yo added. "My connections in the legal world could be useful." As they discussed the possibilities, Taehyung's phone buzzed. His face grew serious as he read the message. "What is it?" Min Se-yo asked, noticing his expression.
Taehyung sighed.
"It's from my contact in the prosecutor's office. They've uncovered evidence suggesting that Jun-suk's corruption network extends further than we thought. There are indications of involvement from high-ranking government officials." A heavy silence fell over the table. They had hoped that Jun-suk's arrest would be the end of it, but it seemed their fight was far from over. "What do we do?" Soo-yeon asked, her voice trembling slightly. Taehyung's jaw set with determination. "We keep fighting. We've come too far to back down now." Min Se-yo reached out, taking both Taehyung and Soo-yeon's hands. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." As they sat there, united in their resolve, none of them could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The next phase of their battle would test their courage, their integrity, and the bonds between them in ways they never imagined. Over the next few months, Taehyung worked closely with the prosecutor's office, providing evidence and testimony to build cases against the implicated officials. His business acumen and attention to detail proved invaluable in unraveling complex financial trails. Min Se-yo leveraged her legal expertise and media connections to keep the public informed and engaged. She organized rallies, gave interviews, and became the public face of their continued fight against corruption. Soo-yeon, determined to turn her pain into purpose, started a support group for exonerees. She also began studying law with the goal of becoming an advocate for criminal justice reform. Their efforts did not go unnoticed by those in power. Threats began to trickle in, veiled at first, then increasingly explicit. Taehyung's company faced sudden regulatory hurdles. Min Se-yo received anonymous messages warning her to back off. Soo-yeon's past was dredged up in smear campaigns aimed at discrediting her. But for every setback, there was a breakthrough. More whistleblowers came forward, emboldened by their example. The public, tired of corruption, rallied behind their cause. Slowly but surely, they were making progress. One evening, as Taehyung was working late in his office, he received an unexpected visitor. It was Congressman Park, one of the high-ranking officials implicated in the corruption scandal. "Mr. Taehyung," the congressman said, his usually confident demeanor replaced by a look of desperation. "I want to make a deal." Taehyung regarded him warily. "What kind of deal?" "Immunity," Park replied. "In exchange for everything I know. Names, dates, transactions, all of it." As Taehyung listened to the congressman's proposal, he realized they were on the verge of breaking the case wide open. But he also knew that making deals with corrupt officials was a slippery slope. "I need to discuss this with my team," Taehyung said finally. "I'll be in touch." After the congressman left, Taehyung immediately called Min Se-yo and Soo-yeon. They met at his apartment, the gravity of the situation evident on all their faces. "If we do this," Min Se-yo said, "if we make a deal with Park, it could give us everything we need to bring down the entire network." "But at what cost?" Soo-yeon countered. "Are we compromising our principles by letting him off the hook?" Taehyung paced the room, weighing their options. Sometimes, he said slowly, to achieve justice, we have to make difficult choices. As dawn broke over Seoul, the three of them came to a decision. They would move forward with the deal, but on their terms. Park would receive limited immunity in exchange for his full cooperation and public admission of guilt. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Park's testimony opened floodgates of information. High-ranking officials were arrested, companies were investigated, and the true extent of the corruption was finally revealed to the public. Through it all, Taehyung, Min Se-yo, and Soo-yeon stood firm, supporting each other through the long days and sleepless nights. Their bond, forged in the crucible of adversity, grew stronger with each challenge they faced. As the dust began to settle, they found themselves at a crossroads. The worst of the storm had passed, but the work of rebuilding trust in the system was just beginning. Sitting in Taehyung's living room, looking out over the Seoul skyline, they contemplated their next steps. We've achieved so much, Soo-yeon said, but there's still so much to do. Min Se-yo nodded. The system needs to change. We need to ensure this kind of corruption can never take root again. Taehyung looked at them both, feeling a surge of pride and affection. Then that's what we'll do. Together, we'll build a better future. As the sun set on Seoul, casting a golden glow over the city, the three of them raised their glasses in a toast. To justice served, to battles won, and to the long road ahead. They had changed the course of history, but their journey was far from over. The future was uncertain, but as long as they had each other, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.